Hello, my name's Philippa Waller.
My name is Penelope Waller, and we are two of the directors at 4D Human Being.
And welcome to the 4D Human Being podcast. What's it all about, Pen?
It's all about your personal and professional relationships. It's about your communication skills, how you lead, how you work and build teams, how you are looking after yourself and your well-being, and how you are much more at choice. What do we mean by that?
Well, sometimes we can get a little caught in patterns in life, and we can all be a little bit on our automatic pilot. So 4D Human Being is all about helping us get back to choice and being a four-dimensional human being. And your fourth dimension, of course,
is intention. So whether it's about your impact, your leadership style, your team dynamics, whether it's about your well-being, whether it's about your communication or your presentation skills, anything that involves human beings interacting with other human beings, 4D Human Being are here to help.
we're going to take a deep dive and look at some tools, insights, theories that are going to help you go from a 3D human doing to a 4D human being, so that you can happen to the world rather than the world simply happening to you. Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It is afternoon. Sunny afternoon in January.
It's a sunny, crisp January, veganuary. I see everywhere.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Go on, try January and vegan January.
No. Let's take that again. Dry January and veganuary.
Veganuary. Okay.
Vegan.
That's
And
yeah, you see.
Yeah, no. I felt like I did it off pat the
you
first
did,
time.
and I've confused your neural pathways.
My very good friend of mine, Anna, went on Mastermind, and she said, "Super segue." No,
that is a pretty impressive thing.
No, she's done quite a few. She's done quite a few quizzes. She's done the chase and a few, and she said what was really interesting about it, which she learnt, I think, from doing other sort of quizzes and TV quizzes, is if you allow the conscious thinking to interfere too much, you lose it. You've actually got to hit that button at the impulse trust moment where it's almost the subconscious that's got it. And when you're in that space, that flow space, these answers come out of nowhere. And I find that sometimes in Italian lessons, when I'm in a flow, I can draw a piece of grammar that I had no idea.
Like there's some tiny piece of grey matter at the back of your head.
But if you think too much, it's almost like,
we're never going to be able to say vegan January again, ever. But veganuary,
that's
it. And dry January.
Yeah, combined.
That is denying yourself some stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, well, if you think about that, we're talking today about physical energy, physical dimension.
Probably very good for you.
But isn't that interesting? Because actually, as we talk about how you take care of your physical energy and how you show up, we're really going to bridge into the work we do at 4D, like physical impact. Why is it important to take care of physical energy so that when you need it, you can walk into a room, make an impact, stand up in a presentation, make an impact. But you're absolutely right. It's no good if it's just tortuous to do any of these tools or tips. It's got to be accessible and doable.
Totally.
Or we're never going to do it.
Well, absolutely similar to how some people talk about how tough it is maybe to go on a diet or to regularly go to the gym or whatever it might be. I'm with you 100%. People do also talk about how tough it is in terms of physical impact to make big changes in terms of how we show up, like using big gestures, putting our arms out when we're presenting and speaking. It can feel deeply, deeply uncomfortable.
Well, Laura, whack me out a super segue right here. Thank you very much, Penelope. So we're talking very much at the moment over the next few months about that re-energizing. And we've also been talking about the fact that when we're in the room, often when we're coaching, though not always, because now we do neuro-depth coaching, we're going to talk about that more when we talk about emotional energy. We are really working from the inside out.
Yeah.
In the room, often we're giving tools on how to make an impact, how to communicate better as a team. But the reason that it can feel really hard to change your gesture levels is because right from inside, we've got patterns right from our breath patterns that means we are operating in a certain way
that's familiar to us.
That's familiar. And if I give an example, if you've got a pattern around restricted breathing or shallow breathing or holding breath, if you just even thinking about that, if we then imagine trying to walk into a room or stand on a stage and make much bigger gestures, if you think about it from, if we just try and paste that on when we haven't expanded from the inside, it's going to
feels super
awful,
weird.
Really dreadful.
And exposing, and
pretend.
Yeah, and you know, a sort of an equivalent to think about here is I often talk about how we behave on the London Underground, the tube when we're travelling, and I'm sure it's the same in any big city. You know, when you're in a packed kind of train carriage, you go small. Yeah, you cross your legs, sides
like
down,
walking down a street late at night.
Yeah. And what we're talking about for some of us can feel the equivalent of walking onto a train and sort of legs apart, broad stance, shoulders back, arms out, making eye contact. Here I am. I love that. And it just feels really weird.
Well, I love that. And actually, I mentioned walking down a street late at night, of course, and we all have different patterns when we're in fear.
Yeah.
That some people will expand in fear and kind of, you know, toughen up, broaden out. Yeah. And actually there's research done on this of what's actually they're both really useful because sometimes you want to
go small.
You want to go small because you don't want to be noticed. Yeah. So if we think about that pattern when you're trying to host a meeting, chair a meeting or do a pitch or a presentation and your fight or flight's kicked in, which is why the breath is so important. We're going to link all of this together.
And then you go small. Yeah. And then the body-brain signals have kicked in.
And then exactly. And then you know from the training you've had that you need to make an impact. So that's why we're really going to talk about physical energy and physical impact from the inside out, the bridge between our internal physical energy and how we really take care of it. Because what we're really interested in is, well, why are we bothering talking about physical energy and physical well-being? Like, why do we care? Because the things we want to do in life.
Yes, and it's so linked. It's so linked to our emotional dimension, our intellectual dimension. I was in the room last week, did a fabulous conference over in Houston with our lovely co-director, Matt. We were doing a piece around emotion. It was the ego work that we do. I got them in pairs. They knew it was an exercise. You know, they're aware they're not in a real life situation where they're getting emotionally triggered. Without exception, after they'd done the exercise, they were talking about the fact that emotionally and intellectually, they were partially able to kind of hold things, but the physical let them down. The physical.
What happened?
Both internally, in terms of, even though it was just an exercise, the internal physiology in terms of being triggered. Now, whether that's
got like squeezed and tense,
the heart's racing or the tightening of the stomach, but also externally as well in terms of taking a step back, or crossing the arms, or the hands were sort of shaking, or whatever it might be. And this is why, and I said to them, this is why the physical is so important. It gives us a way, and it's the part of ourselves that we can really use to shift our emotional and intellectual patterns as well. So it's so important.
Yeah.
The physical dimension.
So going back to what we spoke about in the previous podcast, if we're just trying to top up with a donut and some coffee, you know, we're not really resourcing ourselves physically to be able to keep ourselves in a really nice, steady physical state, which will then mean we're less likely to get surprised and triggered and pushed into a behaviour. We're much more likely to be able to be in charge of our physicality, which means taking up the space in the room. And you're absolutely right. I mean, we've said this so many times before. When we think about the physical, it's the physical dimension that when you walk into a room at an unconscious or at least a subconscious level, the decisions that are being made about you've taken barely a step into the room. You haven't opened your mouth. Everything that is happening physically, people have decided your status, whether to trust you, whether they like you, whether they're going to listen to you, where your ranking is in the room, whether you feel confident, on everything. And on and on, everything. Whether they want to fancy you and want to date you and marry you. I mean, everything.
It's the absolute foundation.
Yeah. And then, you know, the brain kicks in and justifies all of that and then starts gathering more evidence to back up the original assumption, all based on the physical. So let's start this right from the inside. I'm going to talk about breathing. Part of me, and you may, you know, whether or not you have similar reaction. Talking about breathing. I was definitely, we talked about this, didn't we? I was definitely somebody, and again, just notice patterns because this is all really, really useful. if you know that you've got a pattern when you hear like, oh, take a moment, take a pause, take a breath, and you're going, oh, crack on. Come on, let's crack on. Yeah. That is already telling you so much about your physical patterning that move on from actually stabilizing internally. Let's just crack on. Yeah. And you're much more likely with a pattern like that to be spinning into a sort of much more fight or flight mode and be operating from there just on an everyday basis and not even noticing.
And as I said to you earlier, I don't have a breathing practice. You absolutely do. And I think part of it is you can't see it.
Yeah, exactly.
So that belief system we have that it actually makes a difference when what you can see is somebody else's behavior or, your language or how you're showing up. You can't see the breath. Yeah. So then to make the association with it's actually really important in terms of how you're going to behave and speak. You're like, yeah.
So let me do the science on this. A quick word from us at 4D Human Being. If you're enjoying the show, please do click follow so that you can have the 4D Human Being podcast instantly in your feed. And we'd love it if you liked and reviewed us. Let us know what you think.
Please do think of one or two people that you could share the 4D Human Being podcast with. Somebody who would really benefit from the content you're listening to right now. Back to the show.
So just to reassure anybody listening, what we're going to do in this podcast is talk a little bit now about what's actually going on at that fundamental kind of physical pattern and why it's important to really genuinely take care of our physical energy at a fundamental kind of nervous system level. And we're going to bridge that into what we see in the room, what works, why physical energy is so important in terms of leadership, business, teams, sales, pitching, negotiating, all of those things.
And what we can actively do.
Because we're going to put it really into practice, bridging from the inside out. Right. I want to talk about breath. So if we think about what we're going to talk about is physical experience bridging into physical expression. Oh, that's a book. Right. Because, of course, at 4D Human Being, really what we're interested in ultimately, and we know that those of you listening is that application. Because it's all very well, I think we've talked about before, eating the right foods, doing the breathing practice, doing your yoga, all of those great things. But why are we doing them? We're doing them to do the things, have the energy to do the things that have meaning in our lives, to be able to, go on those walks, go to the gym, see our friends, run our business,
have the calm mental state of mind.
Yeah, have the calm mental state of mind so that we can do the things that we love. It's not just to sit on a beanbag for the rest of our lives. I mean, unless you are making that choice, which is also valid. So let's really talk about that inside, the breath. If you have, and
you are passionate about this.
I am passionate about it. Well, because it's been such a fundamental realization, I suppose. And I see it in clients across psychotherapy and 4D, that we will often go to above the line. We'll often go to what are we seeing showing up? Like what's the narrative of our lives, or what are the irritations, or what are the obstacles or decisions we don't seem to be able to make? When underneath it, we are in fight or flight all the time. We're holding our breath, or we're tense, and we're like there's underneath the surface is all of this stuff that is. Somebody described this to me. Alan Dolan, who does a lot of breath work, and I did a few workshops with, describes your breath as the baseline of the song of your life. Yeah, that it's like the building block onto which everything is built.
And you can think about this. Sort of step one of this as it literally is the fuel for your voice. Yeah. So you can think physically in terms of your impact, it does for your voice. But at a much deeper level than that, it starts the whole pattern around how you're feeling, what you're then thinking, what you're then going to say, how you're going to relate to other people. It's the absolute foundation of it.
100%.
And it doesn't necessarily feel like that to those of us who are not sort of practiced breath technicians or practitioners. Yeah. But if you think about it, it absolutely is the foundation.
And of course it doesn't feel like that because it's just happening out. Like you don't wake up every day. You're not in every moment going, take a breath. Yeah. Like it's just happening. You don't have to think about it. But definitely let's talk about voice as well when we bridge into impact in the world. But exactly that. And you're absolutely right. You could listen, if you could start observing your own breath pattern, or you might notice it in someone else, without having even much knowledge of psychology or, psychotherapy degree or whatever, you could take a pretty good guess at how that person might operate in the world. If they've got a calm, smooth, deep, diaphragmatic breathing pattern, you could take a pretty good guess that they are fairly solid and
fairly well regulated.
If they've got a kind of effortful, working hard but pushing their breath, you could take a pretty good guess that that's how they live their life.
Because
over effortful.
That is what is feeding the nervous system.
Feeding the nervous system. So let's talk about that. This is the bit I want to talk about, and then we'll really shift on to physical energy out there in the world and in the room. If you've got a kind of hyperventilating pattern, so you're kind of breathing a bit fast, if you're breathing shallow, if you've got a kind of held breathing, anything where you're not breathing not only into the diaphragm, but thinking about your body as a balloon, into your back, into your stomach, deeply filling with long breaths and good out breaths.
I think about those old diagrams in our biology textbooks at school where it's got all the little branches and veins in the lungs, and think about that all the way through your body. That's got to be filled with oxygen.
And most of us are not filling.
No.
Most of us are not filling that down to the ends of our lungs. We're doing shallow breathing. So if you've got any patterns like that, fast breathing, shallow breathing, short breathing, what is happening in your body is this. I'm just going to take you through the journey, and it suddenly makes sense of so much. You are then releasing, with those breath patterns, you are releasing carbon dioxide into the system. So and your arteries are constricting
with a kind of short,
fast, shallow breath patterns, or effortful, pushed. You're releasing carbon dioxide into your body. You're also constricting, your arteries will start to constrict, and that includes the carotid artery, which is taking oxygen to your brain. So now your arteries, including the carotid artery, are now constricted. So you are now getting less oxygen. There's less oxygen that can get through to your muscles, brain, and cells and vital organs. At this point, the hemoglobin in your blood that have got oxygen attached to them sort of panic and think, well, I'm holding on like dog in the manger. I'm holding on to my oxygen.
Might need this later.
Panic. So everything's now in panic. You've got lack of oxygen going everywhere, including to the brain, constricted arteries. And now, because you've got raised carbon dioxide and less oxygen, what happens? Your fight or flight now kicks in because it is screaming up to the brain.
Something's not right.
Something's not right here. We're in panic. So you've now gone into fight or flight. Your sympathetic nervous system has kicked off. Not only that, but because you've got depleted oxygen going to the brain, you are now moody, irritable, and you can't think properly. And because of your nervous system going into fight or flight, you're stressed, anxious, and tense.
Yeah.
And that has all happened
because of your breath.
Because of your
breathing. And as we said when we were speaking about this earlier, you're most likely to attach that feeling and that sensation to somebody else in the outside world. 100%. So the next door neighbour or colleague, they're annoying or they're behaving badly. They may or may not be. Yeah. It's possible that everything has started with your breath and then we attach a narrative to something out there in the outside world.
Absolutely.
That's what happens.
Deb Dana, I've banged this drum so many times. Story follows state. So just from your breath, there are many, many people living their lives every day.
Predominantly.
In fight or flight.
Yeah.
And not even knowing that.
And attaching a narrative to something that's
outside themselves. Yeah. Or, of course, to themselves, blaming themselves. I'm an idiot. I should work harder. Why aren't you? You should. You're rubbish. So,
and all of that narrative starts with the state of your nervous system.
With the state, because if you imagine, I don't know, laying on a lounger on holiday,
lovely,
or whether you're a yogi, laying on a yoga mat or in front of the fire, and being really relaxed, that cup of tea or that drink. You're going to be much less likely to be calling yourself an idiot or the next door neighbour an idiot. So we know it. It's really obvious. But what we don't realise, because we're often out of touch with our physical, that we're living in fight or flight, and then ourselves or other people are the problem, are irritating. So this is one of the many reasons to start regulating our nervous system, because we're going to be wasting a lot of energy physical and emotional and intellectual, because we've kicked ourselves into fight or flight. It's such a waste of time. When we're regulated, things just come more easily. So take a moment, simply observe, just get really curious about the pattern. If you take one of the tips at the end of today, it's also in our newsletter. If you take a double inhale, it's a really simple tip. Do this for like 30 seconds. A double inhale, so in and in again. You are going to fill those depleted lung sacs that we were just talking about.
Fill your boots.
That don't, exactly, fill your boots that don't get enough oxygen.
Yeah.
And then if you take a really long, full out breath and really get rid of that carbon dioxide, you do that a couple of times, you are kicking yourself back into your parasympathetic.
Yeah.
So it's like taking your nervous system to a beach lounger, basically. Yeah. Yeah. Just give it just go, why don't you just, actually, you know what? The neighbour, she's probably a bit stressed at the moment. Why don't I pop round with a, box of muffins?
Nice.
Yeah, exactly.
And as we were talking about earlier on our beautiful walk this morning, it does take a little bit of consciousness and effort. I mean, eventually, I'm sure lots of people who have breath practices kind of do this automatically, certainly before they'd go into a difficult meeting or a big presentation. But it does take some effort. We have to look at the self and think, right, what can I do? Take the moment, do the breath. It can be easier, it's particularly in a subconscious way, not to do that and just to point the finger at what's happening out there in the world.
Well, also, I think it's a really good point. And also, I think what can be easier, if you imagine yourself sitting, as we've done many times in our lives, sitting on the front row at the edge of a conference, we're just about to be introduced, we're just about to go up, because of the nerves, and we get led by the nerve, physically led by the nervous system. What can feel more familiar, let's say, or maybe easier, is to kind of tense up, brace, brace, right, going in, let's get through this.
Yeah.
And that can work well enough, but your experience, if you keep doing that again and again, your experience of yourself, your colleagues, your audience, and your life is going to be one of, let's just get through this. And that is so different from breathing back into yourself, physically grounding,
and being here.
Now let's go. Yeah. And now this is where all the wonderful next stage of 4D tools can kick in. Because once you're in that state, if you release your breath now, and now just see what it feels like to take your arms slightly higher in a higher gesture. That feels very different to bracing and trying to take these stiff arms out into a waist-height gesture to welcome your audience. So everything from there starts to feel much easier. And now we can talk about, okay, once you're in the physical, once you've sort of got your energy right and balanced, because when we talk about physically re-energizing, that's not like pumping on a treadmill. It's getting full of oxygen, full of like real, like physical energy that's ready to go, not tense. Now we can help you really walk into a room and be in conversations and present in just a way that is going to be world class.
Exactly. And a nice bridge from the inside to the outside is kind of that midway point, which is the voice, which is obviously generated internally.
Which is the bridge,
but we hear it externally. And anybody who's done any kind of choral training or any kind of speech training will know that the breath is absolutely fundamental in terms of how the voice is produced. And you absolutely know when somebody is in fight or flight when they're speaking, because you can hear it in their voice. The voice might crack, or they can't speak for very long without taking another breath.
I always say that to leaders: if you can't lead yourself to the end of your sentence, how can you lead an audience to your message?
And it gets much harder to project the voice, etc., etc. So the first thing the breath will do is regulate your nervous system. The second thing the breath will do is give you a wonderfully strong foundation to generate the voice that you want to come across in the way that you want. And we know, we'll get onto the physical body language in a moment, but a massive portion of the impact that you make on other people, what they'll think about you, how they'll talk about you, is the tonality of your voice. Not what you say, the tonality of your voice. And it pretty much ends, but definitely starts with the breath support in terms of the tone that you've got, and you'll know when you haven't got that breath support because the voice kind of cracks or goes high, or
you're coughing,
very breathy, etc., etc. So it's doing so many things.
Yeah. So we know that voice is really key. Have a play with this in the next meeting that you're in, or if you go to a conference, and compare which speakers you really enjoyed, and become a vocal anthropologist. Ask yourself not what was the content, but actually what was the experience. If I shut my eyes for a moment, maybe not in front of them if you think they can see you, but if I just remove my eye contact for a moment, just to make it really a clean experiment, what's the experience like on my ear to hear their voice? And we've talked about this before in terms of radio shows, podcasts, YouTube videos. We've all done it. Bought an audio book that has been recommended to us, forgot to play the sample, then press play. I cannot listen to 20 hours of that voice. And it's not the story, it's the voice. So that's the voice. So that's the bridge, if we like, from experience to expression. Now let's talk about body language and why the physical is so important and when that is missing.
Well, the first thing to say before we get on to the impact that's having, and a lot of the work we do is around impact. But we also know at 4D that, yes, it's around impact. That's what people are often interested in. That's why they first come to us. But subtly weaved through the work that we do around impact is really what sits underneath that in terms of how you're feeling and what your own body is doing. So the first thing to say on our physical behavior, if you like, is the impact it's having on ourselves, even before we start talking about the impact it's having on other people. So in terms of your confidence levels and how you're feeling and your internal nervous system, your physiology, all of those things, how you move and behave externally will impact that, which is why we so often talk about the inside out and outside.
And it's a loop, isn't it?
It's an absolute loop. So there's two things to think about around
and the difference, because we're talking about physical energy and energizing, the difference between a kind of pushed physical energy and a difference between a really well-resourced physical energy that can feel like, when you're really tapped into that, unlike that tense energy where you're like, I reckon I can get through 45 minutes, when you're in that really nice supported physical energy, you're re-energized from the breath up, you actually feel like you could go on and on
totally
and on. You've got a lot more stamina and resilience.
Well, I always like to think about sort of being a cave woman.
Sure, Pen.
Because I think
you're revealing a fantasy there.
I am, because I think in the modern world we can get kind of lost in the situation and the environment in which we find ourselves, and we can pin lots of blame or reason or whatever or needs on the environment around us. So let's take ourselves back to being a cave woman or caveman. If you are completely tense, you're not presenting on a stage. You're either in a cave or you're out there on the savannah, hunting the woolly mammoth. If you're completely tense, think about the reasons that there might have been for that. If, on the other hand, you're making yourself very, very small, again, think of the reasons that there might have been for that. And our hardware has not changed. So if in the modern day you're standing up there ready to present and the body is tense or the body is really closed and small, those signals going from the body to the brain are exactly the same as they were back in the day. Nothing really
You're
has
about
changed.
to get it from the woolly mammoth.
You're about to be eaten.
You're about to be impaled.
Exactly. That's another reason why actually we get so scared, because we've got hundreds of pairs of eyes on us, which, again, back in the day was probably not a good sign. So if we really think about how we're behaving physically, it might make sense based on the fact we're standing on a stage, and that might make us feel nervous. All your body knows is the position and state that you're putting it in, and it's furiously sending signals to your brain for your brain to try and to interpret how am I feeling, what should I be doing, is there danger out there? That's what's going on. So the body is the starting point in terms of how you're going to be feeling. So important to think about.
So really thinking about, if we really link this to energy, that what is it about people who have an impactful energy? Why is that important? Because it's not just about the way you look or the way you dress. All these things are important physically. And of course we talk about that in terms of physical impact and facial expressions and gestures and all of in the way that you stand, and all of these things are, the physical impact are really important. Right at the center of that is your physical energy in the world. And what is the difference between a team member or a leader who walks into a room with physical energy and somebody that doesn't?
Yeah. Well, we are reading energy all the time as human beings. We know that we are interpreting language as well all the time. But as you say, at a deeper level, we're interpreting each other's energy, and it's very quick and it's very easy for us to do. Subconsciously, we understand energetically how people are showing up. And it will change our own brain chemistry. So if you imagine us all being interconnected neurologically, now
which we are,
and to some of us that might sound crazy, but that is a fact. That is how we operate. The way that somebody shows up energetically on a stage, a part of their brain will be lighting up, and the same part of your brain will be lighting up. Think of yourself as a human being, as a leader, as coding other people's brains energetically based on how you're showing up. So depending on how you're feeling, if you're held and you're tense, I mean, when you see somebody like that on a stage presenting, it's quite weird as an audience member because you're not standing on the stage and yet your whole body can go really, really tense.
Absolutely.
And this is what's happening to us. We are coding each other neurologically. So in terms of how you're feeling and showing up physically and energetically, you will be coding and making your audience or your team members feel in a certain way. So it's hugely important because then that's their foundation for how they're feeling and behaving.
And I want to come on to that exactly as a leader or team member, how you're contaging other people. And something in what you say feels really important, that to take sort of extremes, you could have a pretty positive message, but maybe you've got some stresses at home, or maybe there's something else, there's a change coming up in the business, or you could have quite a difficult message. Now, the instinct is to think, well, the positive message is going to land well and people are going to feel good, and the difficult message is going to land terribly and people will feel terrible. But of course, what it's going to depend on is your state and your physical, partly, your physical energy and how people feel when you walk into that room. And I have heard people say a number of times that when they've had really difficult news, where there's going to be, layoffs, or there's going to be redundancies or difficult changes, that people have said to the leader who gave that message, I'm so glad it was you that gave this message because of the way that you've made me feel about it. Yeah. And equally, you can have people walking out of a presentation or a meeting sort of slightly confused because they thought the numbers were good, but somehow they've left feeling tense or anxious. And that will be about how much tension, stress, and held physical energy to some extent that leader or that person, how they communicated. So we're just reading so much from this. It's yes, of course it's about the content of the message. Not as much as we think.
No, totally. And we've been looking at Patsy Rodenberg's 3 circles recently, haven't we, as well, which is another nice way to look at energy. We look at energy from kind of a scale of 1 to 10 when we're thinking about our external impact, which is also impacting ourselves. But you can also think about energy circles. So a sort of a closed circle is perhaps when we're a little bit held and we're pulling in. Mm-hmm. It's quite difficult to make connection with people then. The 3rd circle is just, as you said before, that sort of pushed out energy.
Yeah.
And that middle circle is where we are present and connected. And that's that kind of flow energy. And that's when you feel really kind of motivated. Now, that's your sort of charisma circle where you feel connected with people. They can really motivate you. You can really feel how they're feeling. And that's that lovely kind of flow state of energy.
That's a really, really lovely connection. Because I was just sitting here thinking there's always a danger when we talk about physical energy that we've all got to be pumping at a 10 all the time. But the Patsy Rodenberg presence, those kind of energy circles, is a really good way to think about it. That in that 3rd circle, that push circle where you're pushing energy out, that is when you haven't done that inside work of connecting. Exactly that. So that middle circle, it doesn't have to be at a 10, it could be at a 5, but it's right there. It's in flow. It's right from the breath and the heart and the inside out. Yeah. Now this brings us beautifully. Super segue us here, Laura. Come on. This brings us, before we get to some of the tips, this brings us to something that I think about a lot through my psychotherapeutic work. Leader as regulator. Now, Winnicott in psychotherapy, the good enough parent, I want to be really clear about good enough. We're not trying to sort of talk about being the perfect parent or the perfect leader. But an emotionally overwhelmed parent cannot regulate an emotionally overwhelmed child. So if you are emotionally overwhelmed and you can't self-regulate, you cannot diffuse the emotional overwhelm of your child. Now, or anybody, sibling, anything, or friend. And the first thing we do, as anybody who's done first aid, if anyone's having a panic attack, the first thing you do is regulate your own breathing, because they're much more likely to click in with you. Now, when we think about this in terms of energy as a leader or running a business or even a team member or a mentor or whatever it might be, are you able to regulate yourself so that you can regulate your team?
Yeah.
Because whatever words you use or story you tell, if you are energetically tense in fight or flight and there's some difficult decisions coming up or difficult sort of territory to navigate as a team, your team are going to feel how you feel. If you are able to get yourself grounded physically and keep yourself resourced physically and energetically, even in difficult moments, like a parent able to regulate a child who's frightened or anxious, even through difficult times, your team, if they feel that from you as a leader, it's like you are the sort of containing, holding, regulating parent. They are going to navigate change and difficulty so much better. Because they are going to be contaged by I think there's going to be a little bit more of,
I think we've got this.
Yeah. We're going to be okay, even though it's tough. Yeah. We don't have to go spinning into fight or flight or panic. So when we think about physical energy, it's so contagious. You do that work on yourself. The ripple effect is absolutely huge. The gift that just keeps on giving.
100%.
And they'll go home much more regulated.
Give that to their family.
It just goes on and on. So what can we do to really re-energize ourselves physically? Well, I'm going to hand over to you. Do you want to take a look at the list?
Well, do you know, one of my favourite things is the Crazy Eights, which I don't know if it's on the list, but I do that quite a few times with
well, one of the tips we put is running on the spot, which is basically the same thing. So you can run on the spot or
Crazy Eights. So we'll come on to that in a moment. So gesture levels, for me, this is a really, really wonderful piece. And we use our gesture levels a lot when we're doing presentation skills training and public speaking training. So really thinking about how much space you're using up around your body, and just really, really notice where your gesture levels tend to be, particularly if you've got a job where you tend to be sitting quite a lot, or, perhaps not presenting or not energized a lot, or online. You may notice that your physicality in terms of your gestures is quite limited and quite low. So really think about pushing your energy levels up much higher. It can feel really strange at first because the body memory kind of isn't used to that space for lots of us, unless you do sports or something else. So just get used to sometimes putting your gesture levels up high and just seeing how it's feeling. If you have time, video yourself. Because telling you the difference in terms of your gesture levels, in terms of how you look, is incredible.
Well, also, how does that make you feel and how does it make other people feel?
Yeah, well, in terms of the signals that are going to your brain from your body, the more space you take up, you're getting different signals going to your brain. Your brain is going to release more testosterone. You're going to feel more confident. The audience is going to be, their mirror neurons in their brain are going to be firing up, so they're going to be feeling confident as well. So it's just like this loop of people.
You're going to keep them energized as well.
It's this loop of energy that's going on, and it starts with physicality, and gestures is a really nice way to think about that. Facial expressions as well. We can often sort of dull down the facial expressions
when we get caught in information, particularly.
Yeah. And we do this a lot when we're doing vocal work as well, in terms of the muscles that you're using in your face. We can get a little bit lazy in terms of the facial muscles that we use, particularly when we're dealing with people that we know very well and that's very familiar to us.
Just get casual.
Yeah, just get really casual.
Yeah.
In terms of our voice and our projection and what's going on with the mirror neurons to other people, really thinking about using your facial expressions as well, and moving your mouth a lot more as well.
So a really easy way to think about that is to widen your eyes and dial up your facial expressiveness by 1 or 2 points. Just think, I'm just going to go a bit further. I mean, sometimes we'll coach people to be like cartoon, and when you film them, because it doesn't look.
No, that's right.
Because they've gone so far the other way.
That's right. You can really notice how internally it can feel exaggerated. Exactly. But externally it doesn't.
And again, that will give you much more energy, and your team members or your clients much more energy. going to come on to crazy eights. You can run as fast as you can, or if you can't run, you can pump your arms, or crazy eights.
Crazy eights, which is, I don't know where this exercise came from. Did it come from the world of theatre?
No, improv.
Yeah. So you stand up, you kick your left leg out 8 times, then you kick your right leg out 8 times, then your left arm, then your right arm, and then you do 7, 6, 5. You go all the way down. It can be really, really quick, and it's partly to get warmed up if you're doing some exercising or presenting, and it will also change your internal physiological state because of how the body is behaving. That's a really, really nice way to get warmed up.
It activates you. And what's interesting about this is really, really important to think about this with your physical energy and the physical kind of triggers that can happen to our nervous system. If you get pushed into activation very quickly, that shock, we get pushed into,
and the adrenaline
kicks in, and we can get pushed into fight or flight. Suddenly someone says, right, can you just stand up and give, present? Whereas if we activate ourselves into the sympathetic, it's much more like taking ourselves to the gym or choosing to go on a roller coaster. There's a different part of the fight or flight that is about excitement and exhilaration and thrill and kind of joy, but it's us doing that to ourselves
rather than it
happening to us, rather than the world pushing in. So it's not that we never want to be in that activated state, because it can be really exciting. It's like falling in love, or like I said, going on a fairground ride or doing a parachute jump. Like, it can be very exciting. Yeah. When we do it to ourselves through some of these exercises, the nervous system goes, all right, come on, we're on, let's play. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then the final one is that tip I gave on breathing. Inhale twice. So you are filling your boots, as Penn said, filling your lungs with that lovely, lovely stress-reducing oxygen. Breathe out right to the end. You're getting rid of all that stress-inducing carbon dioxide. And if you think back to that journey of the breath, it means that you are opening those arteries, you are allowing so much oxygen into your brain, cells and muscles. And the last one I would say is, this is, I think, just fascinating for life. Start to notice when you're cleaning your teeth, when you're waiting for the kettle to boil, when you're sitting at your desk, just start to take a moment to notice, what is your breath doing? Are you holding your breath while you're putting your makeup on? Who doesn't do that?
My mascara. I mean, I'm quite quick putting my mascara on,
but
thank
the
goodness.
Breath holding.
I don't breathe. I don't know why.
Yeah. So when are you not breathing? When are you shallow breathing? When have you held it? When are you forcing your breath? Get really curious about your breath patterns, because it is in the most peculiar moments we don't even realise that we're not even breathing.
Yeah.
Amazing.
I know. I'm going to add one more as well, which you gave me a few months ago, and I use it a lot now with delegates and they love it. It goes back to the gestures, back to the physical, the external choices that we're making. If you're delivering a message, talking to somebody, try doing it first time round with your hands kind of either out in front of you, your palms away from you, or your fists clenched, or even your hands down. And then try doing it with your palms open, facing upwards, and just notice how that changes how you feel, changes the tone of your voice. It's very likely to change the body language of the person standing in front of you as well. It's a tiny gesture, but it's signaling to your body and to the other person something quite different, even if the message is the same.
That is a really good example when we think about physical well-being and physical energy and then physical impact, that whole journey. That open palms is a really, really good example of taking us from a tense, but sort of, in a way, there's energy, but it's got a tension, to a flow energy that is open and ready to go. Yeah. And that's what we're talking about. Not that tense, gritted teeth energy that can feel like it can, and I know that feeling. It can feel like, I've got energy, but that is going to be short term. So that's a really beautiful exercise for that. Okay, we are going to leave it there. That's packed with tips. That's your foundation. Love the physical dimension. I mean, just keep thinking about it from the inside out. If you know that you are somebody who pops the smile on your face, tenses and braces your shoulders and gets out there and gets through it, it's only going to take you so far. You are going to hit a ceiling at some point, either career-wise or energy-wise, and hit burnout. Get right inside to that breath. Start taking care of it. It is going to be the gift that keeps on giving, so that when you then walk into a room or chair a meeting, you're going to feel different. Your experience is going to be so different, and so is your expression. Take very good care. We're going to take care of our physical energy now by having a lovely lunch.
We are. It's Sunday, so it's roast chicken on the menu.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. Take good care and stay physically resourced and energized from the inside out.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the 4D Human Being podcast. We hope you enjoyed the show.
Do take on board some of the insights, tools and tips, because every time that you try something new to get back to choice, you are making a vote for the you that you want to become. And I love that phrase, Pen.
I do too. And please do share this episode with somebody that you know would really benefit from the lessons and learnings we've been chatting about today.
And of course, if you're interested in more from 4D Human Being, do get in touch. We run workshops, trainings, online, in person, conference events and keynotes. We've got the 4D OnDemand platform for your whole organisation. And we do have a free Essentials membership where anybody can sign up for absolutely free to access some of our insights, tools and tips. So do get in touch with us if you'd like to hear more. We cannot wait to hear from you and to carry on the conversation.